So welcome. Today is our, in case we couldn't tell by the, the attendance, today is our Move into Stillness meeting. And it's a very important one. So I'm happy that you're here because I recently had a discovery, an insight that I think is very foundational for greater success with somatics. And so I'm going to share that with you today. We'll see how that we'll focus primarily on that, and then we'll see if that gets us into any of the continuation of last week's movements or not. If not, then we'll do that starting next week, most likely. So this important understanding is that this is that the I want to put this as clearly as possible. When a person is depleted in carbon dioxide in the blood, then there are many downstream effects of this. You might be wondering why I'm talking about this. I'll make that clear in a moment. But just to understand that when a person is depleted in carbon dioxide in the blood, there are many downstream effects from this, none of which are in general desirable, at least none of which are desirable chronically. There are some circumstances in which it can be desirable short-term, very short-term, as a short-term stressor, but it is a stress. And it disrupts every physiological process. So in particular, one of the ways in which this is very relevant for our exploration of somatics is that insufficient carbon dioxide is going to result in inefficient or deficient oxygenation of the tissues. The reason being that there's something called the Bohr effect. And this just is that it was an observation by a guy named Bohr, B-O-H-R. He was not Niels, he was the father of Niels, but he observed that hemoglobin binds oxygen tightly in the absence of carbon dioxide. So it only releases oxygen when there's carbon dioxide. Now this is very relevant because apparently 98% of the oxygen in the body is bound by hemoglobin. So there are some notions out there that if you breathe very heavily, they call it deeply, but we'll clarify that in a moment, that what they're referring to as deeply is not deep per se, it's just it's hyperventilation. But that form of breathing, hyperventilation by any other name, is often referred to, people refer to it as oxygenating the blood. Now, apparently this is actually true, that it will increase fairly insubstantially, but nonetheless, it will actually increase the amount of dissolved oxygen in the blood. However, 98% of the oxygen is bound to hemoglobin, and hyperventilation depletes carbon dioxide. So now you may be wondering, well, what on earth does this have to do with me, and why are we talking about this, and how does this relate to somatics? So let's put it all together. If you happen to be a chronic hyperventilator, which we haven't yet established, but if you happen to be, then you are chronically deficient in carbon dioxide. When you're chronically deficient in carbon dioxide, your tissues are poorly oxygenated. This is a stress. this is going to cause, well, not only that, it causes disruption of the pH in the body, because the carbon dioxide is a buffer in the blood. When the carbon dioxide is lowered, then the body has to maintain the pH of the blood, so it has to pull some buffer from somewhere else in the body, which disrupts the pH elsewhere in the body. So this can produce like tetany. So it's well known that extreme hyperventilation, if you've ever done or if you heard of any of these kinds of breath work, like rebirthing or holotropic breath work that are done because they're believed to have therapeutic value, actually, they're all hyperventilation. And hyperventilation is, in those cases and in any form, is known to produce tetany, which means that the muscles begin to spasm and contract uncontrollably, which I have experienced because I've done those forms of breath work in the past. So I know exactly what that experience is. And I don't recommend it because it's not a positive thing. So that's at an extreme level, but at a milder but chronic level, this can, well, at any milder level, but also if it's chronic particularly, which is what we're concerned about here, that will produce chronic tetany or spasms or contractions in the muscles, even though perhaps milder than what would be experienced at the extreme. So now maybe you're starting to see how this is connected. So if you happen to be a chronic hyperventilator, which we'll clarify momentarily, but if you happen to be a chronic hyperventilator, then you will most likely you will experience chronic, uncontrollable spasms and tension in the musculature of the body that you will be unable to release, even though you may be able to get some significant release or relief through the pure practice of somatics. That it's become clear to me recently that you're doing it the hard way. And when you do somatics in combination with proper breathing, which restores carbon dioxide levels to a healthy level and thereby restores balance in the body, you make things much easier for yourself. And I'm hoping to demonstrate that to you today, or rather to have you demonstrate that to yourself. So now we need to just establish whether or not you're a chronic hyperventilator. So I first was introduced to the Buteyko method in 2013. And the Buteyko method is one method that has done a great deal of study into this matter. And there are others, but this is the one that I have the most familiarity with. Buteyko was a Ukrainian / Soviet physician, and he was this, I haven't actually read any of his first person accounts, but what I understand second hand is that he was early in his career, he was assigned to study the breathing of sick people. And what he found was that sick people had a larger, what's called minute ventilation than healthy populations. So all that means is, in the period of a minute, how much air is, what's the volume of the air that's exchanged? So at that time when he was doing this research, I think this was in the late 1940s, early 1950s, he was finding that now I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think he was finding that healthy people, their minute ventilation was like 5 or 6 liters. per minute. And unhealthy people, it was a much substantially larger, could be as much as 12 or even 14. So in more than double what the healthy populations were breathing. Another important point is that over breathing, so the higher the minute ventilation, as we've already established, reduces carbon dioxide in the blood. But for every 1 point of, and the unit of measurement is, it's like millimeters of mercury or something like that. But for every 1 unit of carbon dioxide that's reduced in the blood, it's 2% reduction of oxygen in the blood, oxygen flow to the blood, oxygen to the brain. So at those very high levels of hyperventilation, the reduction can be like 50%. It's very, very significant. So now, so Buteyko went on to make a whole career of this, and the Soviets invested significant money in his research. They apparently they viewed it as useful for their space program. So what he found was that by training a reduction of hyperventilation, that is the normalization of breath, it's thereby the carbon dioxide levels are restored. And when the carbon dioxide levels are restored, health improves on all parameters. So he actually established a whole many charts showing the correspondence between breath and various disease states, and he could predict how the person would recover and what that would look like. So this method became established for retraining normalization of breath. So the Buteyko method, the way in which the breath, the CO2 levels are determined, is by what they call a control pause. Now, my understanding is, and I've seen quotes from standard physiology textbooks, that I don't know that they have a different name for it, but they also use the same test. So it's not unique to Buteyko, but it's used extensively in the Buteyko method, and we're going to explore it today. Now, this test, if you find it uncomfortable, then you should not do it. So let me repeat that. If you find it uncomfortable, don't do it. Or the moment you begin to feel uncomfortable, if you feel uncomfortable, you should stop. It should be stress-free and uncomfortable. Sorry, stress-free and comfortable. So we're going to, I'll describe the test to you, but I will say it involves a stress-free breath hold. Again, if you find it stressful or uncomfortable, you should stop. It's not dangerous, but you should just stop if you feel uncomfortable. And there's absolutely no benefit whatsoever to persisting in the test if it provokes stress or discomfort in you. Okay, so the purpose of this test is to establish if you're a chronic hyperventilator, and B, to set a baseline, and that way we can also utilize the test again to find benchmarks along the way to determine if the process is useful in restoring normal carbon dioxide levels. So the test is, I think I already mentioned this, is called the control pause in Buteyko. So the test is this. You're simply to breathe through the nose. So as I'm talking, I'd like you to just breathe through the nose, and I'd like you just breathe normally. So don't try to do anything to control the breath. Do try to be as relaxed as possible. So obviously being relaxed will have some change in the breath, but don't do anything to try to manipulate the breath. Just try to breathe through the nose and be as relaxed as possible. So we're going to do that just for a minute or two. And the reason for this is just to get you prepared for the test. So as you're breathing in that way, so you're just relaxed and breathing normally through the nose, that's it. While you're doing that, I'm going to describe to you what the test consists of, which we will do momentarily. So you're going to continue to breathe in this normal, relaxed way through the nose. And then when we begin the test momentarily, how it will begin is that you will be breathing and then you will choose an exhalation. And at the end of that natural exhalation, which should not be abnormal in any way, so it's just the end of the normal exhalation, not forced. You're not trying to get all the air out of your lungs, nothing unusual whatsoever, just the end of the normal exhalation. You're to pinch your nose, so you keep the mouth closed and you just pinch the nose, relax, and you're going to, for our purposes here, you don't need a timepiece. You'll just count like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, that kind of thing, to roughly estimate the number of seconds. So I'm just describing it right now, and you're just relaxing and breathing through the nose. But the way that it's going to work is that you'll, at the bottom of an exhalation, you will, when you feel comfortable, you're going to simply keep the mouth closed, pinch the nose, and you're going to count while remaining relaxed. Then to estimate the number of seconds, we don't need to be exact here. It's just for our purposes today, counting in this way will be good enough. And the moment that you feel the urge to inhale, you will simply release the nose and inhale normally through the nose and resume breathing in the same relaxed way. So the important thing to understand here is this is not a maximum breath hold. Remember, it should be stress-free and comfortable. So it may be, in an extreme case, you find you start to feel the urge to breathe, and you start to feel the onset of a little bit of discomfort in 1 second, in which case you simply release the nose and you breathe. It may be that it's 5 seconds. It may be that it's 10 seconds. It may be that it's 20 seconds. You'll see, whatever it is, there's no prize given out for holding your breath the longest, because this is not a maximum breath hold test. Your goal is for the breath hold to be natural, relaxed, and stress-free. And when you resume breathing, you should resume breathing through the nose, and it should be basically the same breathing pattern as when prior to the breath hold. If you find that you're having to huff and puff, that means that you held the breath too long. So hopefully that's clear. So now you've had a few minutes of relaxed breathing through the nose. So at your own pace, when you feel ready, go ahead and do that test. So at the end of a natural exhalation that's not forced, you'll pinch the nose, hold the breath in a relaxed way, counting the number of seconds. And when you're done with that, you'll release the nose and inhale. So go ahead and do that when you're ready. Okay, so if you're still counting, that's fine. But I counted to around 40. And so I'm thinking probably for most people here, you're not going to exceed that. If you do exceed that, that's excellent. If you do exceed that, then you're not hyperventilating significantly, although there's still room for improvement. The ideal, according to Buteyko, healthy populations, that is those who are free of disease, have a control pause or a CP of 60 seconds. The findings are that anything below a 40-second CP will correlate with some fairly substantial disease of some kind. It could be anxiety, could be depression, could be asthma, could be digestive problems, could be heart problems. It could be all kinds of different things. And obviously, the lower the CP, the more severe the symptoms will be. So now you have a baseline to know kind of what your starting point is. Now, so if your CP is less than 60, you're a chronic hyperventilator. If your CP is less than 40, you have a fairly significant hyperventilation issue. And the lower the CP, the more significant the hyperventilation is. So in a sense, the lower your CP, the better news this is for you, because what that means is, to put it in perspective, when I first learned about Buteyko, my CP was 5. And I had no question about it, some very significant challenges. So I've definitely found, in general, the suggestion is about for every 5 seconds that your CP increases, you will notice a significant improvement in your state. And I have found that to be true in my own experience. So so don't dismay if you say, oh my goodness, my CP is 3 or my CP is 5. And you know, that's okay. That just means, okay, it's in a sense, it's wonderful, because it means now you have something to reference, and now we're going to establish what you can do to restore healthy, normal breathing, so that you can restore your CO2 levels. And then you'll find that even long before you get to the 40 to 60 range, you're going to find definite improvements across the board. But in this case, we're looking at it specifically in terms of somatics. You're going to find improvements in your experiences and gains with somatics as you begin to move in the direction of normalization. So let's talk about, I mean, if there's anybody here who has a CP above 40, please just type that in the chat so I can know. You can see I'm smiling a little bit because I'm dubious. But if so, do type it in the chat so I can know, because that would be helpful information for me to have. But for anybody whose CP is, if your CP is, let's say, under 15, then, well, let's say under 20. Okay, if your CP is under 20, then you don't want to, so please don't just go Googling Buteyko breathing techniques, because If you do, then you alone are responsible for your results. But I can provide you with safe instruction that will help you. So I urge you just to take this instruction that I'm providing instead of just Googling and trying to find whatever you can. So the first thing is you need to know, so if you're under 20, don't do any breath holds. Because if you were, I mean, other than the CP is fine, unless you found that very uncomfortable. But as long as it's non-strenuous and not uncomfortable, then then that is fine. But some slightly more advanced Buteyko practices, not super advanced, but slightly more advanced, do involve some slightly longer breath holds. When it's appropriate, they will be fine. But if your CP is under 20, then the thing that you want to focus on, two things. Okay, number one is you want to ensure that you are breathing through your nose all the time. When you breathe through your mouth, you are almost certain to hyperventilate. And you also lose many of the other benefits of nasal breathing. For one thing, when you breathe through the nose, you get better filtration. So you can consider that part of your immune system. You're protecting yourself. So you want to breathe through the nose for that reason. For another reason, when you breathe through the nose, you also warm the air because the air has much more, travels through much longer distance, relatively speaking. And so the air is more warmed, which is better for the bronchial tubes in the lungs. For another thing, when you breathe through the nose, you generate more nitric oxide, which nitric oxide in the wrong place, not so good. In the right place is beneficial. In the nasal, in the nose is beneficial. It helps for many things, including it opens everything up so that your breathing is easier. So if you happen to be somebody who feels that you have a difficult time breathing through the nose, that can be corrected by breathing through the nose. And if you find that very challenging, then you can let me know and I can point you in the right direction to help you develop that ability. But that's the first thing, is you want to be breathing through the nose all the time. So you want to just be aware, are you breathing through the nose? So perhaps you find that at rest, you're breathing through the nose, but when you're moving, you're breathing through the mouth. If that's the case, then you want to slow down, because what that means is, so we can kind of transfer over some of the principles of somatics to learning how to breathe, is if you're breathing through the mouth when you're moving, then what that indicates is that you don't have competency in that movement. And so you need to slow down so that you can gain competency in the movement. To put this in perspective, most people, even people who otherwise breathe through the nose, when they're engaged in athletics like running, tend to breathe through the mouth. This hurts their performance, it hurts their health. And most people think it's impossible to breathe through the nose when doing a high intensity athletic event. This is untrue. It is possible to learn how to breathe through the nose. Even so, many athletes learn how to breathe through the nose, and it improves their performance significantly. So you want to just understand that we have many beliefs that we accept those beliefs as true, but they're not true. They're only beliefs. And those beliefs can be harmful to us, such as the belief that I have to breathe through my mouth in order to do this activity. You can learn how to breathe through the nose doing more or less any activity. And the way to do that, you apply the same principles from somatics, you slow it down. So if you're doing the activity and you think it requires that you breathe through the mouth, just slow it down. I mean, you have to ask yourself, I mean, obviously, it's a life and death situation. Fine, you breathe through the mouth short term if you got to escape from the fire or whatever. But otherwise, you need to be truthful with yourself. Do I need to be rushing? Is there any hurry for me to get over to the sink to fill the glass with water? Do I need to become breathless in order to do that? Do I have to be huffing and puffing through my mouth, or might I just slow down, get there 5 seconds later, but with better well-being? So you want to slow down, close the mouth, breathe through the nose. So when you breathe through the nose, you begin to preserve carbon dioxide. So honestly, the number one thing that you can do to help yourself, breathe through the nose. Okay. Second thing is, because sleeping is a time in which it's a significant part of our time. If you're 24 hours in the day and you're sleeping for 8, it's a third of your time. So if you're hyperventilating while you're sleeping, then that's pretty significant. There are some people who are advocates of taping the mouth shut during sleep. I cannot I don't have any personal experience with that, so I can't recommend that one way or the other. All I can say is I'm personally not attracted to putting tape on my mouth, but some people report benefits from it. But I won't comment on that other than just to say that is a thing that some people do. What I can comment on is this, that if you happen to be in the habit of sleeping on your back, that's going to significantly increase the likelihood of you breathing through your mouth. So sleeping on your side, particularly on your left side or on the abdomen, significantly reduces the likelihood of breathing through the mouth. This is a fairly well-known thing. It's also validated by a lot of sleep studies that show sleep apnea, for example, is significantly worsened by sleeping on the back. It's the worst way to sleep for anybody who hyperventilates. So keep that in mind. If your sleep environment is too hot, it's going to significantly increase the likelihood of hyperventilation. If it's significantly too cold, it would perhaps also increase the likelihood, but it's more likely that too warm would be a problem than too cold, unless it's the middle of winter and you don't have any heating. Okay, so those are some things that to keep in mind that can be very helpful. Now, the next thing is a simple, and we'll do this, I'll guide you through it, is a simple reduced breathing exercise. And for those who are participating in the Bliss Techniques program, we did something similar last week, so some of this will be familiar to you. But there's going to be some variation on this that's specifically looking at actually reducing the minute ventilation. So in order to you can do this breathing practice anytime, anywhere, whether you're in any position, whether you're sitting, lying down, walking, running, any activity But if you are sitting, it would be best to sit upright, not lounging or leaning back, or certainly you don't want to compress the abdomen if possible. If you're lying down, you can lie on the back to do it, but just be aware that lying on the back does, for the same reasons that it increases hyperventilation while sleeping, it does increase the likelihood of wanting to hyperventilate even while awake. But it's fine. You could try it lying on the back if you wish. Lying on the left side, it gives excellent results in my experience. Or standing is fine. Now, if your CP is under 20, then you'll probably want to initially, the lower it is, definitely this is true. When you get to like 15 to 20, then maybe not as applicable, but you're primarily going to want to start, if you have a very low CP, you're going to want to start just while stationary, and then you can, and your main focus while moving is just to breathe through the nose. But as your CP gets higher, then you can practice the reduced breathing exercise even while you're doing activity. Okay, so hopefully you've selected a position that you'd like to explore this in. And throughout, you're going to breathe through the nose. So hopefully you're doing that already. So you start by just noticing the breath. So as I often point out, you'll notice that the breath consists of 4 conceptual phases. There's the inhalation, there's transition between inhalation and exhalation, there's exhalation, and then there's a transition from exhalation to inhalation. So you just notice, and of course, those transition phases, particularly when you have a really low CP, those transition phases are going to be almost non-existent, other than conceptually. You otherwise will really not notice them much. But you'll definitely notice, hopefully, inhalation and exhalation. So you just notice that that's true, that you're inhaling through the nose and you're exhaling through the nose. And you just notice what that experience is, and then you notice that the breath, if we're using the breath here to refer to the movement of the breath, not the actual air exchange, but the movement of the breath, you'll notice that you can feel throughout the various parts of the body. And here, what we want to ideally, we want to allow for the breath, the inhalation, to descend, so we can really feel that moving into the abdomen. Now, importantly here, you don't want to try to force anything. So what can happen, very commonly, I would say, particularly if you're a chronic hyperventilator, is that when you try and take this kind of deep breath, deep not meaning a large breath, but meaning lower into the body, into the abdomen, you will unwittingly introduce strain and effort where it's not needed, because you're in the habit of generating certain sensations that you think mean that you're breathing deeply. So what I'd like you to do is just relax the abdomen on the inhalation. So don't try and press the abdomen out or inflate the abdomen or anything like that. I want you to just let the abdomen relax on the inhalation. And so on each inhalation, you're letting the abdomen relax. And as the abdomen relaxes, it naturally, without any force, it descends and gently expands, but not through force. So no artificial sensations, just it's probably less than you're accustomed to. And now we'll also bring some awareness to the exhalation, and you'll start to notice that the exhalation, of course, starts right after the transition, right? So we've got the inhalation and then this transition, which for most of us doesn't even, barely even perceptible. And then there's the exhalation. So right there during that transition, or if it's easier for you, you can just be aware at the top of the inhalation, just notice that, is there any unnecessary tension, and just let that relax so that you allow the inhalation to relax everything. And then let the exhalation be totally effortless. So it's like the air is just leaving the body without any force, without any squeezing, without any pressing, with no force at all. And when you do this, well, you'll notice whatever you notice. So what I can tell you from my own experience is that allowing for the exhalation to be completely relaxed, for me, was one of the hardest things to really become sensitive to. It seemed I didn't know what I was feeling. I didn't know how to feel what I thought I should be feeling. I didn't know what I was doing. And I started to feel a kind of uncomfortable urgency. So here's an important thing, and this is always true with any of these breathing exercises, is if it starts to become uncomfortable, then just leave it, and you can come back to it in a moment. Particularly when you have a low CP, the feelings of discomfort will come on fairly quickly, because any reduction in hyperventilation starts to significantly increase the CO2, but your CO2 meaning carbon dioxide, but your CO2 tolerance, meaning what your nervous system accepts as okay, is very low. So your nervous system is conditioned to start to perceive the experience as stressful and uncomfortable, even with a small amount of CO2 increase. So initially, when you have a very low CP, you'll need to just rest and leave it for a moment quite often. So don't try to push through any discomfort. Don't let it be stressful, because if you do that, you'll only make it harder on yourself. Because the increase in CO2 in a sustainable way is actually helping you to restore proper parasympathetic activity in your nervous system. This will help you with greater calm, greater composure, greater sense of strength. All of that comes from improved parasympathetic function in the nervous system. If you push into stress, you're pushing yourself into a sympathetic state, which you're already in. You're just increasing it, and that's not the direction you want to go. So particularly at first, it's a fairly sensitive thing that you need to really be respectful of. Don't push into stress. It will make it harder, very uncomfortable, and not productive. So here our goal is to start to discover a truly sustainable, relaxed, reduced breath, but it should never, ever, ever be forced. So take those breaks whenever you need. And ideally, and as you first get started, you just take the break for as long as you need. But as you become more familiar with it, when you need to take the break, you'll start to become sensitive. So you only take the break just as long as you need in order to recover adequate sense of calm, and then you resume. Because if you wait too long, it's like you're starting over. But if you wait just long enough, then you're getting right to the proper threshold that's sustainable for you. So at this point, all we're doing is just observing the breath, and we're allowing it to be as relaxed as possible. We're allowing for the abdomen to relax and descend naturally without force on the inhalation. And we're allowing for the exhalation to be non-forced and completely relaxed. Now, that right there, as I've already said, might be a lot. But let's see if we can make it a little easier on ourselves. So I'm going to say that this will make it easier, but initially, okay, I'm going to go in a slightly different direction than what I was thinking, because I think in order to make this easier, what I want you to do is just understand those basic parameters of as relaxed of a breath as possible, to be your general parameters, that you're kind of guiding parameters for how to breathe. But then we also want it to be comfortable. So if you're finding that it seems inherently uncomfortable to allow for a relaxed exhalation, then what I want you to know is this is a good sign in the sense that you've identified already, if this has happened, you've identified one place that you can definitely get some significant improvement, and this will help you to feel much better. So even if you're freaking out about it, just take it as a good sign that this means that you've already identified something where you're going to gain significant improvement and benefit in a pretty short amount of time when you follow these basic parameters. So within those parameters, now let's allow for, if you need to, whatever modifications are necessary for you in order to make it sustainable and comfortable, go ahead and allow for that. So it shouldn't be, what we really want is to find that place that's that perfect threshold where it's sustainable, but we're slowly increasing the CO2 level, very slowly, so it's sustainable. And by increasing, I mean normalizing, restoring a healthy, proper CO2 level rather than a depleted level. So your goal, your parameters are that everything is relaxed, but then for many people, they'll feel almost like when the breath is actually relaxed, they feel like they're suffocating, or they feel like they can't get their breath. So if that's your experience, then okay, maybe you need to allow for a slightly larger breath. Even if it's not completely relaxed, maybe you just need to allow for that. So that's okay. What I want you to find as relaxed of a breath as is possible for you that is sustainable. So you're trying to find that perfect threshold where it's right where it's almost like it might start to be uncomfortable, but it's not. So we're not wanting to just go into the habitual, because the habitual is hyperventilation, which leads to worsening symptoms. What we want is to move toward a reduced, gentle, relaxed breath, but we want that to be respectful of our starting point, right? So our starting point might be that we're taking way too much. So it could be too frequent, too large, or some combination of the two. So we need to be respectful of that. That's what our nervous system is currently calibrated to. That's what it expects. Any increase in CO2, it perceives as stressful. So but we need to slowly increase the CO2. So we're moving, we're not indulging our habit, but we're gently moving in the direction of restful, gentle, non-forced, relaxed breathing. So once you're able to find that, and that's a big task in and of itself, and that's always kind of a moving target. But when you kind of settle into that where you feel, oh, okay, I'm able to breathe I can start to feel the rhythm of this breath. I can feel that, yes, there's something a little different about it. It's a little bit, like requires my attention. It's not stressful, but it's on the verge of discomfort in the right way, in the direction of more relaxation. No matter how far I feel from that goal, I'm still moving in that direction. So you start to get into that rhythm. Then what we can start to do is we can start to play with how we can actually start to reduce the minute ventilation. So a couple of suggestions, and I'll give these to you, and then you can play with them and see which ones work best for you. So one suggestion is bring your attention to the nostrils, and I want you to notice the experience of the air moving through the nostrils. And whatever it is right now, I want you to just see that you can make it a little gentler. So you don't have to try and force anything or anything of that. Just a little, see, can you make it a little softer, a little gentler, meaning just a little slower, so that like the sensation of the air moving through the nostrils reduces just a little bit, just a tiny bit, maybe 5%. So that you maybe, and when you notice that when you inhale, unless the room is really hot, but if in general, the rooms that we're in are usually cooler than our body temperature. So you'll notice the air going in is slightly cooler than the air coming out. And then you can notice the sensation of the coolness of the air entering as you inhale. And notice how far do you feel that coolness into the nostrils. And if you slightly reduce the flow or the speed of the air, so it's just a little gentler, can you notice that that slightly reduces how far you feel the coolness up into the nose? So nothing extreme, just a gentle exploration. And similarly on the exhalation, allowing for the flow of the air to be a little gentler. So, initially it's like when you're first starting, when you're exhaling, if you had a feather that you were holding, like one of those, like tufty feathers that you were holding in front of your nostrils, it would be blowing all over the place. And you want to start to have the sense that it's reducing. So it's just it's a little bit less, it would be agitating that feather. Eventually, we can get to the point where the breath is so calm, so smooth, so gentle that it wouldn't agitate the feather at all. But that's maybe a long way off. So for now, you just imagine it's just a slight reduction in the agitation of that feather. So these are some suggestions. Now, if that's working for you and very helpful, excellent. If you're finding that challenging, here's a different suggestion. So this suggestion is that you just notice how much of your inhalation is. So notice you get a sense of the size of the inhalation. So you take a few breaths so that it's normalized, so that each inhalation is more or less the same. So you're in that rhythm, it's comfortable, or on the edge of discomfort, but comfortable. And then I want you to just reduce the inhalation by 5%. So not a lot, just a little bit. If you think that you're going to try to be an overachiever and you say, well, I can do 20%. Yes, you might be able to do 20%, but for how many breaths? And what will happen is you'll start to experience some pretty significant air hunger within a few breaths, and you'll become very uncomfortable and stressed. And that's not what you want. So 5% or 2%, because our goal is just a slight reduction just of the inhalation, not the exhalation. The exhalation is just relaxed, non-forced. But the inhalation, which is the active part of the breath, you just reduce that by 2 to 5%. And you keep that, maintaining that same reduction. So you're not reducing 2% every time, just you reduce 2% and you stay there with each inhalation. And you do that for a little bit, and you see, how is that? If that's totally comfortable, then you could reduce a little bit more. But you need to give it 5 to 10 breaths at least before you try another small reduction. And you only do another small reduction when you feel, yes, this is fine, this is totally comfortable, absolutely stress-free, and I feel ready to slightly reduce it. So these are the ways that you can, these are some suggestions for how you can start to slowly reduce the breath. So you can play with all of these suggestions, but in general, you'll maybe find one or the other to be more useful. So the one is you just want to you focus on the air in the nostrils, and you want to let that become gentler, calmer, slower. And the other is that once you have a normalized, comfortable inhalation, then you reduce that 2 to 5%, and you maintain that until that becomes definitely very comfortable, and then you can reduce it a little bit more and repeat that pattern over and over, never pushing into stress. Now, with that said, you will, especially with a really low CP, you will find that you will experience you'll start to experience distress when you weren't expecting it, because you didn't think you reduced it too much, but then it kind of creeps up on you. When that happens, you just leave it. Just completely forget about it. Just breathe whatever feels comfortable to you. And then when you feel ready again, you come back to it, because especially at first, that's going to happen. And you don't want to make the mistake of don't think, oh, I failed. No, you didn't fail. It's part of the learning process. So just know that you're doing fine. That's part of the learning process. And then you don't need to think, and you don't need to have any other thoughts about it. You just know that's part of it. You leave it, restore your comfort, and then you come to it again. So remember, it should always be stress-free and comfortable, but right on the edge of almost, like it almost could be uncomfortable. But what you'll find is when you find that edge and you really get into the rhythm of that, and you let it be relaxed, very, very important, should not be forced. Then you'll find that everything starts to get better. So it's not This is should not be an uncomfortable process. It should not be torturous. It shouldn't be something that you don't want to do. This is something that when you get the hang of it, you'll realize, oh, this is much better. So if you find that allowing the exhalation to be unforced, gentle and relaxed seems like an impossibility right now, again, just know you've identified something that as you apply yourself to this, you'll see that improves. And as that improves, you are going to feel much better. That's the spasming often has to do with too big of a breath. Now, you might think that sounds crazy because you might not think you're taking that big of a breath, but you are. If you're experiencing those spasms on the exhalation, if you feel like it's totally uncontrolled and you don't know how to let it be relaxed and smooth and gentle, it's almost certainly too large of a breath, that you're in the habit of taking too large of an inhalation. So you can't go from there to, you can't leap all of a sudden from chronic too large of a breath to the proper size, because that's going to increase the CO2 retention dramatically, really quickly, and your brain isn't yet calibrated for that, so it's going to freak out. So understand, again, we're not trying to go to unnatural CO2 levels. We're trying to restore natural CO2 levels. That's what the process is. But along the way, because of the calibration, present calibration of the brain, it's going to perceive increases in CO2 as uncomfortable. So we have to be very gentle, very slow, very patient with it. Understand, now this I haven't verified, but I have seen evidence that historical records of minute ventilation were that in around the turn of the last century, average minute ventilation for healthy populations was between 3 and 4 liters per minute. And now the average is like over 6. So so what is considered to be healthy is always also moving. So just, I mention that because I want you to understand that at an earlier time, there's good evidence that even not that long ago, that, like many of our grandparents or great grandparents, their generations, the healthy populations had, or what was considered healthy, had much lower minute ventilation than what's considered healthy today. But then you understand that what's considered healthy today, which is just free of what's considered disease, it's not all that healthy. So it kind of makes sense. So we're not trying to do anything extreme. And I'm mentioning this just because I don't want you to start thinking that it's an extreme thing. It's about normalization so that you can restore what you're designed to have so that your body can function well. So we'll conclude momentarily. I just want to finish with a few more things that you can look for. So, well, first of all, I encourage you to do this reduced breathing practice, remembering that it should be stress-free, gentle, and it should help you to feel more relaxed and more comfortable, even though there's maybe an initial little transition period where you have to kind of move gently in the direction of the edge of discomfort. But as you get acclimated to that, which doesn't take that long, just a few minutes of steady, reduced breathing, you'll find that then you start to feel more relaxed, more comfortable, anxiety decreases, the body starts to relax. So we obviously didn't get into how to utilize this with somatics today, but we'll hopefully do that next week. But do this before bed at a minimum. Do this for 10 minutes before you go to sleep. Just when you get in bed, just practice the reduced breathing exercise, probably lying on your left side. It will probably give you the best results. This is particularly important because that will help you to get adjusted to reduced, more normal breathing as you're transitioning to sleep, so that you'll start to get in the habit of nasal, regular breathing in your sleep, which will help you tremendously. So at a minimum, I highly recommend you do it for 10 minutes before you fall asleep, or let's say for however long it takes for you to fall asleep. But you might find that you'll fall asleep much more rapidly this way. So that would be my suggestion at a minimum. However, if you want the best results, honestly, you want to be doing it all the time. At first, it seems like something it's kind of almost like a chore, but as you get more and more familiar with it, you'll find it's not a chore. It's delightful because you feel better. Because remember, it should be stress-free, and ultimately it's comfortable. Understand initially there's a little bit of an acclimation for a few minutes as you get started and establish this slight reduction. You're on the edge of discomfort, not pushing into stress. But as you acclimate to that, within a few minutes, it becomes much more comfortable than what your starting point was prior to. So ideally, you can just practice it all the time. But at a minimum, you want to do it once a day before bed. You'll get much better results if you do it all the time, because this is about trying to establish normal breathing, that is healthy, physiologically normal breathing all the time, because that's what's going to give you the best results. And there's a question, any goal to get to a short natural pause? Well, yes. So is there a goal to get to a short natural pause at the end of the exhalation? But that will come naturally. If you try to force it, you will only make things harder on yourself, and it will put off getting the positive results. Buteyko himself said, he wrote, there's a quote from him. He said, he naively thought early on that because he was initially teaching this to other doctors, he's like, these are educated people. I'll just give them the information, and they'll be able to do it, and they'll get results for themselves and their patients. And then what he found was he gave them like the end goal, and they all were trying to emulate that, hurting themselves. So as I often say, if you're trying to emulate your own, you're not going to get the results that you want. So that will happen. But you can look for it, but don't try to force it, because if you try to, it will not work. With that said, once your CP is above 20, maybe before then, but definitely when it's above 20, then I can share other exercises where we do introduce intentional breath holds, but that's a practice that's not done all the time. That's done for set periods as a training, and it's independent of that. But some of those practices do involve intentional breath holds at the end of the exhalation. Another thing, okay, a couple of things. We're going a little bit over, but I'll wrap it up in a few minutes. So if you experience constipation, then this can also be very helpful. So I recommend, do not strain to evacuate, because if you strain to evacuate, you're just establishing the wrong habits that will work against you. Squatting is very helpful. And then doing the reduced breathing exercise will also be very, very helpful. So do attempt to avoid the habit of straining, which I know is common, but use the reduced breathing exercise, and you will, sooner or later, you'll find that it's helpful for constipation. And anytime that you're experiencing anxiety or distress, you can use this very gently, as always, but very gently, and you'll find that it's helpful. Because if you're experiencing anxiety or distress, your attention is in your thinking and your breath is disturbed. That's just true. So when you use this gentle reduced breathing exercise, when you're experiencing those states, you're doing multiple things that are helpful to you, and you'll find that it's very effective. You're shifting your attention, because you can't do this breathing practice if your attention is in your thinking. Your attention has to be with the breath. So that in and of itself is very helpful. And then the second thing is, physiologically, when your breath becomes stabilized and your CO2 levels become more in the direction of normalized, it's going to improve your physiological state. You're going to get better oxygenation to the brain. Your hormones are going to, status is going to improve. Your better blood flow in the body, better tissue oxygenation, everything improves. So it's very helpful both in both senses. So those are some practical ways that you can apply it that will give you short-term benefits, and then make sure that you're also doing this before bed, like as you're going to sleep. And then that's all I'm going to say about it today. Oh, just the last thing though, again, stress-free. Don't push into discomfort. Please remember, so important. And I know somebody's not going to remember that. So one more time, stress-free, don't push into discomfort. It should help you to feel better. It's not something that you have to push through so that 5 years from now you can feel better. It's something that when you do it, apply it correctly, you will start to feel better very quickly, within a few minutes. So it shouldn't be, you shouldn't feel like you're suffocating. If you feel like you're suffocating, you're just pushing too hard. So it should be comfortable. Although for the initial transition, for a few minutes, you might feel the very just slight on the edge of almost discomfort, not over the edge. Okay. So that's it for today. Thank you, everybody. Blessings to you all, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.